Hello and welcome to episode 150 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. Today is November 27th, 2023. I've got Todd Smith and Bill Sutton with me. Bill, how's it going?
Going great.
Bill, how was the Thanksgiving holiday?
It was relaxing. Spent time with family, ate some turkey, the same old thing, but it was good.
How you feeling this week?
Not bad.
Okay. Todd, how about you? Before I tell you what happened to me, I'll ask you, how was your Thanksgiving?
My Thanksgiving was great. We actually took the week off and only had a few customer conversations during that week, but got a chance to see family. My son flew in from St. Louis with his girlfriend and her daughter. So I had a 5-year-old running around the Thanksgiving table. Went over to my brother-in-law's and his family and celebrated with family and friends, and then spent some time up on the farm in Maine clearing off 3 inches of snow that happened.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah,
it was good.
Plenty of those opportunities, I think. So my story is I came down with a stomach bug Wednesday night, and it not ruined, but it impacted my entire family's Thanksgiving because I'm somewhat involved in making everybody happy and keeping the peace and keeping everybody entertained. So I don't want to say I definitely did not help the Thanksgiving Day activities, but it went on without me, which is kind of good too, because they all got to do their thing without me. And I got to lay in the bed for a day and a half. So I kind of rested, kind of.
You're probably the only person that lost weight over Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Definitely lost weight over Thanksgiving. Hey, so today's blog is, let me pull it back up here.
Well, I also saw your Wolfpack won too, Andy. So that was a good thing, right?
It's always a good thing.
Always a good thing.
So we did go to college football on Saturday, and it is the North Carolina rivalry, if you will, in football. My kids will tell me their rival is Duke, which is probably true, but they lose in football a decent amount to North Carolina State. So I like to try to think it's somewhat balanced.
Yep.
So the blog that we chose to do from today is actually back from September, and it is from Calvin Shu. Calvin's a good friend of XenTegra's and the podcast. But the blog, the title of it is 1 Year of Citrix as Part of Cloud Software Group. And it really talks about kind of the vision and what's happened and what their plan is forward. I kind of brought this one up, guys, as one that I wanted to do. It's probably good for the 150. I really didn't do a good job a minute ago highlighting this, our 150th Citrix podcast. But, we're at 150. It's been a year into the cloud software group. I believe this one's good to kind of just keep reminding people what's going on. Citrix is part of this private held organization. One of the business units is privately held as part of the Elliott and Vista ownership group. Todd, why? So I brought this to you guys. You guys agreed to cover this. What's the importance of taking a moment in time and looking back for you over the last year?
Yeah, so I think it's a really great and opportune time to actually talk about this because we're a year into this newly formed cloud software group. And if we look back a year ago, October 1st is when the cloud software group was officially formed. That was the September 30th was the end of Citrix as a publicly traded company. Cloud software group came out as October 1st. There was a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt out there. What was going to happen with Citrix? What was going to happen with customers? What was going to happen with some of our core products? We knew virtual apps and desktops was going to be a strong component of what we had to offer. But there was questions about what's going on with NetScaler, what's going to happen with the XenServer, what's going to happen with ShareFile. Those are all valid concerns. And there were valid concerns from both customers, partners, as well as employees. And then, we came out with, our CEO, Tom Krause, came out with this organizational design of having separate business units for each of these core product groups. right? So you see the Citrix business unit has its own development team, has its own support team, and has its own kind of core components. But then there's a model of HR and finance and things like that are all part of Cloud Software Group. It also created NetScaler as its own business unit, ShareFile and XenServer as their own separate business units, along with all of the things that came over with TIBCO, all the other business units as well, all falling under this Cloud Software Group family, an organization. So a year into this, things have been very successful. We have shifted a couple of things, and we're going to get into some of the details around those things, but it was more, how do we compete better? How do we become more valuable to customers and partners? And then more importantly, how do we clearly define what we can do as far as innovation? And this is really where the leather hits the road, right? Or the pedal, the tires, the rubber hits the road. And that is, if we can spend more time and more investment innovating and protecting that core investment that customers have made and expand upon that to actually bring more valuable innovation, right? I think that's where we have made some serious inroads, and we've had a lot of accomplishments in this area.
Bill, your thoughts on the overall idea that it's been a year and we take a moment here to look back?
Yeah, I listening to Todd, I'm like, I'm not sure I can say much more than that, to be honest. But I think the key message that I've gotten out of the past year is, and I know Citrix has said it a number of times, is the concept of meeting customers where they are, and not trying to move customers to the cloud necessarily. Certainly providing a pathway to the cloud, but also providing a lot more development and a lot more commitment to meeting customers where they are if they're on-prem or if they're in the cloud, and providing parity between feature sets between those two deployment methods. I think that's been a key message that we've seen, we've heard, not just heard, but we've also seen in what's come out. Some of the the big developments around providing functionality on premises for customers that still want to deploy the solution in that manner.
I have a question for you guys. I didn't think about this until Todd started talking. What do you think the timing of this is? It just coincidence that the VMware Broadcom thing closed last week?
Yeah.
Similar paths, isn't it?
Yeah. So coincidence and conspiracy are kind of two words that I don't like to use an awful lot, but there are some things here that makes a lot of sense, and it's the shift in the entire industry that's happening. Customers are wanting to go towards more of a service provider model, both for who the vendors that they're working with, but they're also shifting. A lot of organizations are shifting more towards a shared services service bureau model, where they're putting up, it's not only are they holding vendors to SLAs and service levels and expectations, but they're also doing it internally within IT organizations. A lot of IT organizations have fundamentally changed over the past 5 years. They've gone from IT being something that is a necessary evil for a lot of organizations. They tend to fall under a financial office type of build or model. IT is really being looked at as ways to innovate and improve business, but also live up to expectations. Right? IT is no longer kind of the money pit that it was in the past. Right? They have to show more value being delivered and not just sunk cost. And with that value, it could be, hey, how do we influence people's ability to work from home and work from anywhere? How do we reduce security risks? How do we improve performance? How do we make it so our employees are much more productive while maintaining that level of security and reducing risk and things like that? So there's been a considerable amount of change, and that kind of changes. And we talk an awful lot about hybrid work models. This is all part of the hybrid work model.
Yeah.
It's no longer where I'm putting resources and where I'm consuming resources from, but where those employees are working from.
Right.
That's hybrid just as well. The fact that they can work from home, they can go to a coffee shop, they can go to the office, they can go to a branch location and have that same quality in non-disruptive experience is huge.
Yeah. Would you guys agree with the statement that what's happened at Citrix over the past 12 to 18 months and now what's happening at VMware around end user compute and the changing of the ownership structure is really a good thing for their existing and future customers?
Well, I mean, I think obviously it kind of disrupts the status quo and forces them into being more competitive, more focused on the customer, and more responsive, perhaps. I think those types of things often happen when you have a change in structure, change in ownership. And I think Citrix has certainly demonstrated that, and I expect VMware will as well, but we'll see.
But Bill, I love what you said. Todd, if I were to come to you a year, 2 years ago and said that something needs to change and Citrix and VMware and others on the EUC side need something to disrupt the current status quo, what would you have thought then? And in hindsight, what would you have thought?
So I've always been a firm believer that, because people would connect to a Citrix icon to get to whatever their resources were, whether it be an application, a virtual desktop, or things like that, people would just click through that. They would automatically bypass it. So they never really got exposed to the value that's being delivered from a user perspective, from an admin perspective, and from an operational and financial perspective, right? So oftentimes that was hidden, right? And we could probably say the same thing for VMware, right? It is we are a application and service delivery layer where we don't have the end applications like Microsoft has with Office or Excel or a browser, right? Whether it be Edge or Chrome or anything else like that. We have so we were always kind of the hidden and sunk costs of doing IT. And part of that is having to be able to show value to folks that really didn't understand what we did. That was a challenge. And I think the other piece of it is everything now is focused around things like security and operational efficiency and driving. Those are two major components of that value statement. Especially when you look at what is the cost of a security breach? What is the cost of not doing something to secure your environment? What are the potential risks associated with that? What is the cost of downtime? And more importantly, it's the cost of lost time, right? If I have a user that is, it takes them forever to log in and do their work, people don't think about that when they're figuring out what the value is that we're delivering. So I think the biggest thing, Andy, is it's getting to that value conversation sooner and educating customers on exactly what we do. Because in the past, we were always kind of overlooked.
Well, okay, so let me summarize what I was thinking and what I think I just heard you say, not maybe specifically or explicitly. End user compute, boil that down to Citrix in this case, had become part of just doing business in IT, just doing big business in IT, whereas we all know that it's a very niche piece that needs to not be kind of hidden within IT. It needs to be leading the way and very much a leading part of the stack. Bill, is it fair to say that it needed disruption to get out of that mold of just part of IT?
I think it did, and to kind of force innovation, force a different approach, particularly the approach of giving more love to the on-premises customers, that had been the bread and butter for years. I think it obviously helped in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of needed to happen. And by the way, the timing of coming out of pandemic, and now we're going to talk about hybrid work now, made it so where it was way too important to be hidden, just kind of blended in with everything else. It needs to be a forethought, not an afterthought. So, Todd, this next section really talks about, what Citrix said they were going to do. And I need you to kind of, validate that you feel like you guys have hit the mark or not. And that is really committed to the hybrid work story.
Yeah, and I think this is critical because, for so many years, VDI was a necessary evil. It was a very expensive solution for a problem that may not have existed to the extent that you had to go out and spend so much money on a dedicated virtual desktop, right? Because that was the original model, right? Everyone would have a dedicated machine, a virtual machine that would sit in a data center that was always up and running. And then people started looking at the cost of that, right? So they needed to start peeling back the onion and saying, hey, you know what do I really need? What do I really need to get my job done? And then oftentimes that was an access to an application. And access to that application needed to be secure, needed to be reliable. And I needed to be able to have my data follow me and things like that. So now all of a sudden we're starting to talk about a non-persistent desktop experience. And, we started figuring out that, hey, there are different scales of use cases here that we need to work on. The consistent thing is all around the HDX technologies that we had, right? Regardless of what application I'm using or whether I'm using a virtual desktop, I still needed to do things like print, move files around, access information, have my profile follow me without having to be recreated every time. I needed to be able to plug in a USB device and have that enter into either my virtual app or my virtual desktop. I needed to have all these components in there that we were the industry leader when it came to that. And when it comes to that, it's the ability to lock down policies and the ability to have an improved experience that impacts both the user experience as well as the admin experience while still providing them with the security and performance that they need. So there was a lot of things there that we had to do and continue to do.
Yeah. And Todd, it's not like you guys weren't doing that. It was just part of some bigger story that may or may not have been resonating with customers the way you wanted it to.
Yeah, and part of it is, it's the notes, it's the individual notes that get lost in the symphony.
Yeah. Bill, thoughts on this piece?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, there's been a lot of innovation, commitment to hybrid environments. I think obviously the pandemic kind of accelerated this. I think we would have gotten here largely, maybe not to the extent we did, but we got here largely because of that. Obviously the capabilities that HDX offers are key, and the improvements we've seen in that demonstrate a commitment to hybrid work, particularly as it relates to acceleration of things like Teams and Zoom and other remote work technologies. In addition, obviously, like Todd was alluding to there, the ability of a user to just access an application, whether that's a regular client server app or a web app or a SaaS app, and leveraging or coming up with these zero trust technologies. Some of the additional capabilities that Citrix has added, they were already doing this prior to going private, but I think I've seen this accelerated. The concept of secure private access, the secure browser, those types of things that are providing another method for users to be able to access their applications that may not involve the complexity or infrastructure requirements of a traditional VDI or remote hosted application environment. I think all of those things demonstrate the commitment Citrix has towards the hybrid work in whatever form it happens to take.
Yeah. Well, and in the blog, it calls out in this order user experience, and then the next paragraph, security, and you can take those two and flip them back and forth. I don't think there's any doubt that Citrix prior to going private was doing these things.
Yeah.
It was just getting lost in a bigger message. Now that they've taken the business units and pulled them apart, Citrix specifically, it's a much easier story to get people to hear and understand.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that applies to the other business units as well. When you start talking about something like NetScaler, I think a lot of us I would hope that a lot of us might agree that the capabilities of NetScaler, I know we're really not talking about that, but the capabilities of NetScaler as a technology were far greater than that of a remote access solution. Obviously, NetScaler can do a whole lot more than just provide remote access to a CVAD environment or a DAS environment. And I think now that they've broken them apart and they can have more focus on their strengths, and that's going to benefit Citrix, XenServer, NetScaler, ShareFile, all of them.
Right. Yeah, it can only help. I mean, having the attention and the focus can only help, especially when you're in a space that requires this much attention to focus.
Yeah.
Todd, the next section talks about flexible infrastructure and vendor choice. I think maybe tell a little bit about the story prior to all this around what Citrix was really driving people towards and how they've adopted, the new world.
Yeah. So if you remember a couple of years ago, we were driving a lot of customers to the cloud. Cloud was where we were doing a lot of innovation. We were pushing customers to get cloud-based licensing, and realizing, afterwards that there was a lot of customers that either weren't ready to go to the cloud, they were not able to go to the cloud because of financial restrictions, or they just purely were not going to be allowed due to regulatory requirements to move all of their environments up to the cloud. So we had to come up with a hybrid approach. So we came out with hybrid rights, which basically said for a period of time, you could run both on-prem and in the cloud without having to be forced to the cloud. And then as we continued to evolve as a company, realizing that this whole meet the customers where they are concept could also apply towards the infrastructure components of it. Yeah. So if you were going to the cloud, if you had to remain on-prem, or if you were going to a hosting partner, some type of third-party solution or some type of public cloud, you wanted to be able to have one single license, one single entitlement that would basically say, I can run my environment anywhere. So that was a considerable shift on our part. And it probably made sense for us to do that as we merged into Cloud Software Group. It made a lot of sense, right? And we've seen an awful lot of improvements there, right? So being able to say, all development activities are going to be, they have to be cloud enabled, but they also have to be able to run on-prem. Some of these cloud services that were initiated on cloud service or on a cloud model are now being ported to being on-prem as well. So there's there's been a lot of innovation on that perspective that the end user really never sees, but the admins are getting great benefit out of it. The financial and operations side of it is getting a lot of benefit out of that. It's really meeting the customers where they are, but not only meeting the customers, but meeting their entire base of employees, right? The admins, the users, and the folks that are signing the checks.
Bill, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would completely agree with everything Todd just said. I mean, obviously, the ability to leverage multiple clouds, multiple resource locations, whether you're running that in the Citrix control plane versus on-prem, that these are things that Citrix was doing prior to going private, and it's just accelerated since then. There were some things that were in place prior to the privatization that weren't ideal, that have come back, like the ability to manage the Citrix cloud environment from an on-prem controller, or build your environment directly on a cloud provider. A lot of those things have come back, and I think this just kind of resonates back with the same statement made earlier, and that is meeting the customer where they are.
Right. Well, and Todd and Bill, do you think it's fair to say that a lot of organizations are going to either have to realize that's what they need to do, or they're going to have to find a way to convince people that going in their cloud and public clouds is the only path forward? Like, Citrix isn't alone here. Citrix just happens to be in a situation where they can embrace
Yes.
this type of concepts, whereas we'll see if others can.
Yes.
So I think part of it's being driven by the cloud vendors that are out there are in the middle of price battles, and they're all coming up with better cost models. It seems like, they're being hit from a financial perspective, but they're also being hit from an operational perspective of a lot of customers are prohibited from having a single vendor, right? You have to spread out your risk in your vendor stream, in your supply chain, across the board, right? So you have to use both AWS and Google and Microsoft in order to spread out and mitigate that risk, not only from a cost perspective, but also from that risk and availability perspective. A lot of customers, the ones that built massive data centers, those data centers are being financed over 20 plus years. That's a capital expense. That's a long-term capital expense. It's equivalent of building a building. You don't finance that over a 3-year period. You build that out and you spend 20 years building that out. Well, that's a facility that houses your data center, right? So you need to start kind of looking at it from that investment perspective. So a lot of organizations that we were talking to have, they said, we're not moving away from our on-prem in our data centers in 5 to 10 years. We need to have a solution that's going to work, leveraging our on-prem investment and bursting up to the cloud as needed, or expanding to the cloud as needed. And the cloud has become very critical in a lot of organizations' disaster recovery plans, in their business continuity plans, in their expansion and growth of the organizations. So there's a lot of things there that are driving this decision and this requirement for a hybrid environment or a hybrid solution.
So, Todd, Bill, the next section talks about long-term Citrix. It says innovation. I'm going to add the word commitment to the space. Todd, is Citrix the most committed vendor in the end-user compute space?
In my opinion, yes.
Bill, what do you think?
I think that's true. Yes, I would agree with Todd on that.
Yeah, I agree, right? I mean, I can't disagree with that. And to be honest, if you go back prior to a year ago plus, Todd, would you have answered that question? Okay, Todd works for Citrix. So let's make that clear first. Would you have answered that question the same way?
2 years ago, probably no.
Can I pause you there? You ended up using the word no, and I was listening for you to say the word probably, right? Your previous answer was a definite yes, and your last answer was you went as far as to say a probably no, but you even threw the word probably in there.
Yeah,
that's pretty.
So I think if you were to look in the 2-year time frame, there was a lot of things that we were doing that felt like we were forcing customers down a path that they didn't want to go, or didn't need to go, or weren't allowed to go. There was, there was a lot of kind of with that direction. A lot of customers were feeling left out, and a lot of customers were feeling left out in terms of Citrix is not solving my problem that I've got. They're trying to bring in something new that I may or may not need. And what happened with that is the innovation that we were doing in our core products wasn't happening at the same pace as some of the newer things that were trying to come out. And that really had a negative impact on a lot of customers. That had a negative impact on our direction. We also got, if you look at it, we have reinvested and we have recommitted ourselves to solving customer problems, to reducing that technical debt that we had, especially in our CVAD space, and especially in products like XenTegra. We had a large technical debt that was out there. And technical debt is, these were enhancements that were requested from customers, that were requested from our field-based sales teams, coming back and saying, hey, customers are going to go move away from our solution if we don't have this innovation or if we don't change these things. And Calvin highlights in this blog, 84 major client and server updates in the past 2 quarters alone. The 2 quarters of this past year that he's looking back on, that was an enormous amount of technical backlog or technical debt that we had that has been since flushed out. And some of those improvements allowed us to take giant steps forward in doing things like taking the web studio and moving that to more of an on-prem model. As Bill said earlier about being able to manage your cloud environment from an on-prem service, that was huge. Yeah. But that's going to allow us to continue to expand on these use cases and expand on that value that we're delivering to customers.
Yeah. Bill, same question to you. If you went back to, is Citrix the most committed vendor in the EUC space as of November 27th, 2023, in your opinion?
Yes, I believe they are. I believe they are, and I believe they have to be. And I think one of the things that Todd was just talking about, I think if you look at the blog here, the first sentence of this section kind of sums it up, in my view, where Calvin says, I'm pleased that our renewed focus has enabled us to execute on current customer needs. They're focused on current customer needs. A year ago, 2 years ago, sure, they were focused on the customer, but were they focused on really what was considered current needs? And I think to Todd's point, when he talks about kind of forcing, not forcing, but encouraging, maybe strongly encouraging customers to move to the cloud when maybe that's not really what they needed at the time. I think clearly Citrix has changed their focus. And I would probably have answered the question a year ago as a probably, but definitely as a yes today.
Yeah. I would have probably answered it as well. It used to be. I'm not so sure. And now it's a definite, right?
Yes.
And there, your comment a minute ago around, where they're focused, I think you could have said, they might have said the same things a year or two ago, but it may not have been the truth, or it may not have been as obvious as it is today.
Yeah.
Yeah. Todd, a year from now, we look up. What do you expect to see?
I expect to see a lot of, a lot more traction in, not only customer retention, but growth within our customer base. There's going to be a lot more innovation that we're going to deliver upon, both innovation in terms of product innovation, but the way we're dealing with customers, and especially on the support side. Support has always been a bane of most organizations' existence, right? It's something that is very hard, it's very costly, and you have one problem and it kind of migrates across the entire organization, the entire customer base. So we've made a significant investment in our support organization, and that has led to a reduction in our overall support cases, in especially in the time to resolve. But part of that is also we've introduced a lot of things in our support model to make it easier for a customer to not only log a case, but also find the information faster. And it's not just putting terms into Google search and things like that. It's actually embracing things like chatbots and embracing things like interactive troubleshooting that can be done directly from the customer all the way through our support organization, right? That was something that we had kind of gone through the motions of doing some of those things, but now it's become a reality, right? And our support scores have improved, but not only that, but it's also, oftentimes people don't respond to something that's helpful, they tend to respond to things that have gone wrong. And that has really kind of changed over the past year. It's been much better.
Yeah. Well, of all the things I expected you to say, investment in your support arm wasn't one of them. But if you're taking it serious, that is one of the places that investments need to be made. Bill, what do you think is going to happen over the next year for Citrix?
Well, I mean, I think they've already demonstrated a degree of innovation that very quick innovation over the course of the past year with a lot of the new features. You go back a few years and you would not, building a Citrix environment, a CVAD environment, or even a DAS environment or virtual apps and desktop service, then you had to have Active Directory. And now Citrix has embraced other authentication methodologies, local authentication, things that we would never have thought of before. You can now leverage Google workspaces to authenticate. So a lot of those things has come back to the same old theory, which is meeting the customer where they are and embracing the technology they're using and that have adopted internally and being able to leverage that to build on top of that rather than trying to replace it or trying to work around it. And I think that we'll see more innovation and partnering. He even describes that in here with key alliance partners. One of them listed there, I know near and dear to your heart, Andy, is ServiceNow and the ability to integrate the Citrix DAS environment with ServiceNow to enable onboarding, offboarding, provisioning, so many other features that Citrix is embracing and is going to innovate on, I think, as we see things move forward over the course of the next couple of years.
And what I would also probably add is based on the new structure, the new ownership, if things need to change, they will and they can.
Yep.
I think much easier than they could in the past because they're not beholden to Wall Street now, right?
Yeah.
As much as they were before.
And that's exactly right. That's why I wanted to bring it up, is because under big corporate world, publicly owned or publicly owned specifically, it's impossible to make good decisions timely. Whereas under private or even private equity, that becomes doable again.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for jumping on and going through that. Hopefully people find that valuable. It's kind of been fun to watch, and it's going to be fun to watch over the next 5 to 10 years what happens in EUC space. I know this much. It's not going away. I mean, whether it's a zero trust scenario where it's just the managed browser, or whether it's legacy Windows applications or legacy Windows applications, including the desktop, or all the above, those end users are still going to need secure, high fidelity access to their environments. And we're not like we're going away with a dinosaur over here.
No, I certainly don't think so.
Yeah. And if the meteor hits and gets the dinosaurs and us again, well, that's just so much. All right, gentlemen. Well, enjoy the rest of your Monday. Welcome back from the holiday, and it's time to go back to work.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys. Thanks.